Good morning, Bucknutters. Welcome to the Bucknuts Morning 5 here on Wednesday, April 1st, 2015. I am Dave Biddle, and I'm joined by the people's champ, Matt Baxendell. Bax, there is no time to fool around, so let's get right into it. Ohio State head coach Urban Meyer met with the media after practice yesterday, and unfortunately, we learned that wide receiver Mike Thomas will miss the remainder of spring due to sports hernia surgery. The good news is Thomas is only expected to miss about 4 to 5 weeks. He will be fine for the start of preseason camp. In fact, he should be fine for the start of Ohio State's summer conditioning program. But Bax, Thomas is going to be such a huge part of this team this year. I think he's going to challenge for single-season receiving records if he stays healthy. I mean, last year was his breakout season, but he still has further he can go. I think he's going to be an NFL receiver one day. I love his game. So hopefully this is just a minor blip. I think it will be.
Yeah, I certainly hope so too. And luckily, a hernia surgery is, as far as surgeries go to these guys, with all the stuff that some of these guys go through, is relatively minor. You never want to minimize someone else's suffering, but I think if we were talking about Michael Thomas having a knee surgery or something else today, we'd all be in a significantly bigger uproar. And this is a guy who last year had 800 receiving yards, had a number of just spectacular catches. That catch at Maryland for a touchdown where he kept his feet in the back of the end zone was the highlight we're going to see on his NFL reel. It's going to get him drafted very highly next year. For years, myself, Dwayne Long, have been just banging the table for that tall receiver that Ohio State has that can go up and get the ball. Michael Thomas is the only guy we've had really during the Meyer era who fits that split end definition, and I think he's in for an enormous season this fall. And luckily for the Buckeyes, he's ready to go for the start of summer conditioning. Then who cares? Don't risk injury to him at this point in the spring. It's the same thing with Ezekiel Elliott or any of the other major contributing guys. Just get them healthy for the fall. Who cares if they're okay in April? Let them get themselves healthy now. They don't need to be on the practice field and get that much experience like a guy like Thomas does or a guy like Elliott does or some of these offensive linemen we're seeing in the 2,000 rep club that are getting their break. You got to maintenance these guys. So, luckily I think Thomas is in position where he's still going to be in for a gigantic season, and him having this hernia surgery, get it out of the way now so it doesn't nag during the season.
Curtis Samuel continues to impress the coaching staff, and we knew they were high on Curtis Samuel, but Urban Meyer laid it down yesterday. We knew they were moving him around to different spots. He's not just going to play running back. He's going to play some hybrid. They might even split him out wide, although I think his reps will be split between running back and hybrid. But Urban Meyer had the quote yesterday, the days of Curtis Samuel playing just 10 plays per game are over. He's going to play 40 to 50 plays per game. I love this. And they know that nobody's going to unseat Ezekiel Elliott, but they also know that Curtis Samuel is too talented to sit over there on the sidelines. So I love this development back. So they're going to find a way to get Curtis Samuel on the field a lot.
Yeah, and this is an absolute credit to Curtis Samuel. This isn't saying, oh, no, or we're not having receivers step up with, Evan Spencer leaving. I don't believe that at all. I think it's a simple fact of the matter is that this is kind of a role we expected for Curtis Samuel coming out of high school. Remember, we weren't certain that he was going to be a full-time tailback in the first place, and then Urban Meyer and company said they just were so impressed with him when he got to campus that they had to keep him at tailback. So Curtis Samuel is literally forcing his way on the field for more plays. Now, whether that means he's going to have more touches is up for debate right now. I certainly think that Curtis Samuel is going to catch the ball a little bit more, and he's going to touch the ball a little bit more as a backup to Ezekiel Elliott. I think Elliott is going to still get the lion's share of the carries, but let's be real here. When you're at a place like Ohio State where you run the ball as much as you do because of the number of plays this team's going to go with, you need guys like Curtis Samuel who can pick up a half dozen to a dozen extra touches a game. I can't wait to see Curtis Samuel this year. And while in 2 years he may be the starting tailback once Ezekiel Elliott is earning an NFL paycheck, I think Curtis Samuel is setting himself up to be yet another one of those guys who is making NFL scouts drool, because if you're a starting caliber tailback at a place like Ohio State and you're catching 20, 30, 40 passes the year before in a slightly hybrid role, then you are just a extremely good playmaker. And as we learned yesterday, Urban apparently numbers his playmakers from 1 through 12. I'm guessing Samuel's very, very, very high on that list.
I love that. I love that he mentions that he has a list of his playmakers in order. And he mentioned Noah Brown moved up from 15th or whatever. He didn't say what he moved up to. He said he just moved. He's been moving up. He wasn't 15th, and he's moving up. He said by the end of spring he'll have that in order, 1 through 10 or 1 through 15, however many they can go. And he mentioned 3 years ago they didn't have 10 playmakers on offense. Last year they had 10. In fact, they were pushing for more than 10. So he feels really good about the playmakers they have on this offensive football team. And then another one that's coming along a little bit, Breonte Dunn. I think you can take him off transfer watch. I asked Urban Meyer about him yesterday, and he said he's starting to get some momentum in his life. He said it started with special teams last year. So I think people that think Breonte Dunn is destined to transfer, I think you better think otherwise. Looks like Mr. Dunn is going to stick around, Bax.
Yeah, that's not a bad thing at all if you saw him play special teams last year. I mean, let's be very honest. He was very good down the stretch, going into the playoffs and, of course, during the playoffs. And I'm slightly intrigued here by how much Meyer talked about Dunn. And I don't want to read into it, but I find it almost suspicious that as we talk about Curtis Samuel getting more reps all over the field, we're talking about Breonte Dunn doing everything right. Does that mean Breonte Dunn is starting to force his way in for carries at tailback? I don't know. I don't want to go that far ahead of myself and say that. But I think he's putting himself in position to maybe compete for reps when it comes to fall camp. Dunn is a guy that I was sure would be gone after he won the national title, to be quite honest. I figured he'd transfer down to Youngstown State or something like that and get a ton of carries because he was the guy who was recruited as the bell cow tailback. He's one of the players where you don't ever think players regret decisions that they made, but with the lack of carries he's had his first couple of years compared to the tailback situation at Michigan State before, they had some breakout runners in the last year or so. I'm sure there were points in times where Dunn was thinking, I could have gone to Michigan State, or I could have gone to Michigan and been the guy. I think his attitude has changed, though, and I think he's in a position right now where maybe the light bulb comes on a little later for him, but he's one of those guys who could be a later in his career kind of guy who sort of surprises and does well for the Buckeyes. And let's also not forget, tailback is the position you need the most bodies at. Ohio State learned that in obvious fashion at quarterback last year. But when you have more bodies at tailback, it allows you to not have to rely on Ezekiel Elliott overtly against some of the lesser Big Ten teams. I mean, if you have guys who can, like Samuel and maybe hopefully Dunn, who can step in and have a strong role against the likes of Illinois and Indiana and Rutgers and all those other teams Ohio State's going to pound, then you don't have to worry about putting too many miles on Zeke Elliott so you can keep him fresh for the big games. And I think it's only a positive if Dunn can really provide that kind of backup and insurance kind of role while still kicking butt on special teams.
At corner, the Buckeyes have one starting spot open. Obviously, Eli Apple is coming back as one of the starters, and they love him. I think he's going to have a huge year as a third-year sophomore. But that other spot is open, and it was expected to be a good battle between Garyon Conley and Damon Webb, and it's still a good battle. But Urban Meyer said yesterday that Garyon Conley has been running with the ones, which we knew that, but he called him a bright spot. And I don't want to say it sounds like Garyon Conley has the job locked down because Damon Webb is a talented kid. He's not going to give that job up, and they're still going to battle throughout the rest of spring and into camp, maybe even into the season. But right now, it sounds like Garyon Conley certainly has a leg up, and not just he has a leg up because Damon Webb isn't playing well. Garyon Conley sounds like he is playing well. And, again, Urban Meyer called him a bright spot. So for those wondering about the corner position, sounds like Garyon Conley is going to be a starter there. What are your thoughts, Bax?
Well, I think it's premature to name anybody the starter at the cornerback spot opposite Eli Apple, and I say it for one very pertinent reason, and that is that Marshawn Lattimore has not been fully cleared to go at full go yet. They can say he's full go, but the staff is being very careful with that hamstring of his. And if you watched him in fall camp last year, he was an utter standout. I am not overlooking the number one player in the state of Ohio a year ago coming into Ohio State. He's a player who would have played a ton last year, kind of like Conley did. I think that's why Conley has sort of the leg up right now on Damon Webb, is that Conley got in games. He took some lumps in those games, but he showed some ability. He showed some talent. He's a young guy who redshirted for a year, but came into OSU as a four-star recruit at cornerback. If you remember in his recruitment, he's a guy who was actually committed to that school up north as a three-star kid, and as people sort of became aware of just how good he was, that's when Ohio State got in on him and managed to flip him to the good guys. And he's a player who is going to be certainly on the field a lot this year. Damon Webb is another player Ohio State beat out our arch rivals for. He's from Michigan. You know, he's that guy who committed to us early, and his parents actually created a website trying to help kids in the class of 2014 to make sure that they came to OSU. So, you know, there was a 2013 for him. Sorry, my bad on that. But regardless, you cannot make this decision in the spring. You can say Colony is the leader coming out of the spring. But right now, to me, it is not a done deal until we see how Marshawn Lattimore officially heals from that hamstring, because he may be the most dynamic athlete of the entire group, and he certainly showed it during camp last year before his injury.
Great stuff out of the People's Champ, Matt Baxendell. For the recruitniks out there, Bill Kurlick's Recruiting Buzz is on the site right now for you. In the boarding house today, we'll have an interesting note on Warren Ball and much more. That will be posted around noon. Thanks again to the People's Champ, Matt Baxendell. Stay on your toes today, Bucknutters. Don't let anybody fool you. Take it away, best damn band in the land.